a blue hedgehog. Of all places. You have something I need. You can wait until my business is finished.
I noticed for the past few years, we've been getting a new Sonic game like every year. And this year's Sonic game is Sonic X Shadow Generations, which is not only a remaster of Sonic Generations that does a great job bringing back one of the best Sonic games, but includes a smaller yet very awesome new game with Shadow Generations. But let's talk about it. Hi guys, MiiKcast here reviewing today Sonic X Shadow Generations. But before we get started, you know what to do. You should like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell, leave a comment, or I will bring chaos upon you. Starting off with the good, first I want to talk about Sonic Generations. With all the hit or miss Sonic games within like the past 2 decades, Sonic Generations is one of few games where it seemed like everyone collectively was able to admit like, yeah, it's a good game. So a remaster of Generations, if it's done right and priced accordingly, of course, I'd say could be worth it by itself. And I'm happy to say that Sonic Generations is a nailed remaster. To be fair, it's not that different from the original Xbox 360 and PS3 versions, as it is more or less the same game. The shadow stuff, I feel, is where you get the most bang for your buck, and we'll talk about that later. But Sonic Generations didn't have to fix a whole lot with the remasters. Not to say that it's perfect, and there is some things that I'll touch on later, but sometimes all a remaster or remake needs to do is just like touch up on some things from the original, and that's what Sonic Generations is. I always really loved the concept of Generations, as it was a celebration of the Sonic franchise. So each zone had a modern Sonic level where you play as modern Sonic, and the level is in like 3D or like 2.5D, and a classic Sonic level where you play as classic Sonic and the level is in 2D. I always thought it was a unique way to celebrate the past and present of Sonic while actually utilizing classic Sonic instead of him sort of just being there. You hear that, Sonic Forces? As for other stuff this remaster adds to Generations, there are new collectibles. Specifically, there are like collectible Omochows throughout some of the levels, which doesn't add too much more to the game, but it's still neat. And since it's a remaster, obviously they changed up the visuals in Sonic Generations, and I will say that the game looks great. Aesthetically, it's the same as the original, but like visually, it's way more crisp. But then we get the star of the show, I feel, with Shadow Generations. I will say when it comes to story, Sonic has always had something, but not particularly what the series is known for. And pretty much all the characters are pretty two-dimensional, except for Shadow. He's, I feel, always been the exception. And they tried with Shadow the Hedgehog, but that ended up having a whole shitload of issues. But in Sonic X Shadow Generations itself is an absolute banger. First off, I was surprised to see just how fleshed out this part of the game is in terms of its story, its hub world, and its gameplay mechanics. To start, Shadow Generations begins with a cutscene explaining why he isn't with all the other Sonic characters from Sonic Generations. For a while, people asked, you know, where is Shadow in Sonic Generations? So to give an explanation, I think is a very nice touch. But without getting into spoilers, because maybe you want to experience the game for yourself, Shadow Generations touches on Shadow's story and kind of continues a bit from Shadow the Hedgehog, which I thought was neat. There's also White Space, which is the hub world to Shadow Generations, and it almost feels like Sonic Frontiers. It's not quite an open world, but it feels like that. It almost also feels like it has some Metroidvania aspects to it, where you see things but you can't go to it until you unlock a certain ability. Aspects like that I just found very surprising but also cool. There are also challenge stages, or challenge levels, which were in the original Sonic Generations and are back in this version of Sonic Gens, as well as being in Shadow Generations. And look, they are fun in Sonic Gens, but they were never really my preferred levels in the game. You know, still good, but I never really liked them as much as the actual levels. In Shadow Generations, however, the challenge levels are not only badass, but they are just as fun as the regular levels. And then there's the gameplay to Shadow Generations. Obviously, since they are different characters, I shouldn't have expected them to be too similar, but Shadow controls very differently from either of the Sonics. He has so many cool abilities, so many cool gameplay mechanics that I was just not expecting at all, especially that mechanic that you unlock towards the end. As for other things for either Sonic Gens or Shadow Gens, the music in both games, as is per usual with Sonic, goes super hard. Sonic Generations has pretty much the same music as its original, but of course remastered a bit. Shadow, on the other hand, has some fire new music, even brings back some older music from like Shadow the Hedgehog. Honestly, I'd compare Sonic X Shadow Generations to Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, a re-release of an older game that absolutely nails what it needed to do to bring the game back for modern audiences, while adding a brand new, smaller game that is very fleshed out, all for the price of one game.
You saved me, Sonic. I have always thought that you were cute, but did you get cuter?
As for the mixed aspects of Sonic X Shadow Generations, one that I feel is worth noting is that there are some dialogue changes in Sonic Generations. It's never something I care too much about, but I do feel like it is worth noting. And then this next thing is something admittedly very bizarre and maybe more just a me issue, and that's because modern Sonic, classic Sonic, and Shadow all control very differently from one another. You might be, say, playing Shadow for a bit, but then you want to go to Sonic and play some, more of Sonic Generations. But because Shadow has so many cool abilities and controls so differently, you're gonna need to adjust a bit when playing the Sonics. I don't know, it's weird, but that's what I got. Moving on to the bad, I know I said that Sonic Generations retains most of its strengths, but one thing I feel is more apparent in the remaster is a lot of classic Sonic levels feel a little bit dated. Like, in the original gens, the classic stuff was always the lesser of the two, in my opinion, but in here, it feels a bit more clunky, as I guess classic Sonic isn't as mechanic rich as modern Sonic, And that's about it, really, though. Sonic X Shadow Generation seems to be a rare case where you have a franchise like Sonic, where many people like to hate it just for the fun of it. But you get a game as good as this, where even the most staunch haters of Sonic have to give it up for this game. Sonic X Shadow Generations takes one of the best Sonic games in Sonic Generations and remasters it, adds cool new collectibles, makes it look a lot better, and sure, maybe a bit dated in some areas, but overall is a solid way to play Sonic Generations today. But then you throw in Shadow Generations, being more fleshed out and feature-rich than I could have possibly imagined. All that together, and you have a package well worth $50. In the end, I'm going to give Sonic X Shadow Generations a 9 out of 10. It's the best Sonic game since Mania, which, depending on who you ask, is not saying a whole lot, but still, I think that is worth saying. So what do you guys think of this game? You guys like Sonic X Shadow Generations? Do you guys not like it? Have you guys played it, not played it? And if you haven't played it, do you guys want to play it, not want to play it? Anything about the game, let me know down below. Anyways, be sure if the video comes subscribe, or I will bring chaos upon you.